What happens when a decorated Navy SEAL faces betrayal not on the battlefield, but inside an American courtroom? When justice turns its back, some warriors turn and fight. Morgan Carter wasn't wearing her uniform that day. No combat boots, no medals. Just a black blazer, her hair tied tight, and a visitor badge crinkling slightly over her heart. She sat in the third row of Fulton County Courthouse, Atlanta. Silent, watchful, deadly calm. Her younger brother, Ethan, sat at the defendant's table, chains rattling softly whenever he moved. Every time Ethan's terrified eyes found her, Morgan answered with a subtle nod. A promise. I'm here. I've got you. But not everyone in that courtroom respected the truth. Some had darker plans. Stay with us, because by the time you hear what happened next, you'll understand why Morgan Carter became the storm they never saw coming. The air shifted the moment Judge Holloway called the case. Case number 4287B, the state of Georgia versus Ethan Carter. Morgan rose to her feet, moving like a wave building power beneath the surface. Smooth, unhurried, unstoppable. She walked toward the witness stand with the control of someone who knew exactly what her body could do. Every step a quiet declaration of strength. The bailiff, barely out of her 20s, flinched as Morgan passed by. Not from fear, but from instinct. Morgan carried the weight of a woman who had seen war and survived it. She raised her right hand, swore to tell the truth, and sat down. When she spoke, her voice was low, even, razor sharp. Please state your name for the record. Morgan Carter. And your occupation? She locked eyes with the prosecutor before answering. Petty Officer First Class, United States Navy SEAL Team 4. The room tightened like someone had sucked the oxygen out. Suddenly, she wasn't just Ethan's sister. She was a trained weapon sitting in their midst. The defense attorney, a public defender juggling too many cases in too little time, didn't waste a heartbeat. Ms. Carter, where were you the night of March 14th? Home. Ethan was with me. And you have proof of that? Yes, flight records from San Diego, entry logs at my apartment building, security footage, and a neighbor who delivered a casserole at around 10 p.m. A quiet chuckle rippled through the gallery, quickly silenced by the judge's sharp glance. At the prosecutor's table, Officer Rick Dalton shifted, his thick arms crossing over his chest with an arrogant smirk. Morgan caught the motion out of the corner of her eye. She didn't flinch. She never flinched. The prosecutor rose slowly, straightening his tie, as if preparing for a fight he wasn't sure he could win. Ms. Carter, he said with deliberate skepticism, SEALs are trained in firearms, explosives, hand-to-hand combat, correct? Correct. Also trained to protect your own? Yes. Also correct. Is lying under oath part of that protection? Gas flickered through the room like sparks near dry brush. Morgan tilted her head slightly, voice cold as steel. Number. And I haven't lied today. The prosecutor's lips thinned. He lunged again. You say Ethan was with you? How do we know he stayed the whole night? Without hesitation, Morgan answered. You don't, but that's not my burden to prove. It's yours. The prosecutor stiffened, realizing he'd just walked into his own trap. Dalton snorted under his breath, loud enough for those paying attention. Morgan heard it, filed it away. The judge cleared her throat. No further questions? The prosecutor nodded tightly and sat down. Morgan rose, descending 2 short steps from the stand. That's when Officer Dalton moved, a sharp, deliberate elbow to her ribs. Quick, dirty, cowardly. The gallery gasped. The bailiff shouted, "Hey!" Morgan didn't even blink. Dalton smirked like he'd just won a secret battle, but he had no idea who he'd just picked a fight with. Morgan turned, calm as a sniper, sighting down a barrel. The judge slammed her gavel so hard the sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Order! Officer Dalton, step back immediately! Morgan raised a hand, her voice steady. Your Honor, may I speak freely? Judge Holloway hesitated, then nodded once. Morgan stepped forward, never looking at Dalton again. I've jumped out of C-130s over combat zones. I've stood 20 feet from IEDs. I've buried brothers in arms. But I have never, not once, been assaulted by an officer of the law inside a courtroom of the United States. The silence was deafening. Dalton tried to protest, but the bailiff was already moving to escort him out. As he passed, he leaned close and whispered, "This isn't over." Morgan didn't even turn her head. She just whispered back, "Neither is the war." And just like that, the courtroom realized Morgan Carter wasn't just here to testify. She was here to finish what justice started. Outside the courthouse, the spring air hung heavy with tension. Reporters crowded near the steps, shouting questions that dissolved into white noise. Morgan didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She had one mission now: protect Ethan and destroy the system that almost swallowed him whole. She spotted Ethan slumped on a cold metal bench near the parking lot, his head in his hands, his whole body trembling, like a wire stretched too tight. Morgan moved toward him, silent, controlled. "You good?" she asked, voice low. He didn't look up. "They're trying to make me take a plea," he said, voice cracking. 4 years, a felony, just to make it go away. Morgan crouched down until she was eye level with him, her hand steady on her knee. "Did you do it?" He blinked at her, insult flashing across his tear-streaked face. "Number never." "Then don't you dare say make it go away again. Not when you're innocent." Ethan wiped his face with the sleeve of his shirt. His hands were shaking, his entire future dangled by a fraying thread. "I don't want to die in there," he whispered. Morgan's jaw tightened. She'd heard those words before, overseas in battlefields where survival was a gamble, not a guarantee. She stood a wall of iron over her brother. "You won't. Not while I'm breathing." A new figure approached from the shadows of the courthouse columns, tall, lean, moving with the economy of a man who knew how to stay invisible. Morgan's body stiffened, instinct, until she saw his face. "Agent Reeves," she said, nodding once. "Didn't expect you here," she added. "Heard about the circus inside?" Noah Reeves replied, his voice a dry rasp. "You shook the hornet's nest, Morgan." He stepped closer, his glance flickering to Ethan, then back to Morgan. "Dalton's already filed a statement against you," Noah said. "Claims you assaulted him." Morgan gave a single, humorless laugh. "He assaulted me." "I know, and for once," Noah's mouth twisted into something almost like a smile. "We've got proof." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "Let me guess. Security footage?" "Scrubbed. They're already erasing tapes." Morgan's stomach turned. Not fear, calculation. "That's obstruction," she said. "It's Tuesday," Noah deadpanned. For a second, it almost felt like the old days, trading sarcasm in a desert tent somewhere halfway across the world. Ethan watched the two of them, confusion written all over his face. "Who is this guy?" he asked. Morgan didn't look away from Noah. "Someone who still gives a damn." Noah leaned in, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Dalton's dirty, Morgan. 6 excessive force cases, all magically disappeared. Victims either recanted or went missing." Morgan folded her arms across her chest, her mind racing. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. This was systemic, rooted deep, and it needed to burn. "So what do you need?" she asked. Noah pulled a small flash drive from his coat pocket. "Proof. Real, raw, undeniable. Stuff we can leak, safely, and someone willing to stand when the bullets start flying." Morgan didn't hesitate. "You still have server access?" "Limited, but enough to get where I need." She pulled a battered notebook from her bag and scribbled a name. "Find Xavier Bell, Ethan's old classmate. Last person Dalton roughed up before this." Noah nodded, tucking the note away. "What about you?" Morgan's eyes hardened into flint. "I draw their fire." That night, the streets of Atlanta buzzed under flickering neon lights. Morgan's apartment was small, 2 bedrooms, battered furniture, and the scent of old leather and steel. Ethan sat cross-legged on the couch, laptop balanced on his knees, while Morgan rifled through a hidden drawer in the kitchen. Out came a burner phone, a locked USB drive, a folded envelope stuffed with contacts who owed her favors, and some she still owed. "You're really doing this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a breath. Morgan didn't answer right away. She plugged the USB into the old laptop, her fingers dancing over the keys with the speed of muscle memory. Within minutes, she was slicing into layers of encrypted police servers, flight records, incident reports, body cam footage. She wasn't looking for permission. She was looking for ammunition. And she found it. A hidden folder buried deep under training materials, mislabeled but sloppy, like a thief hiding stolen goods under a bed. Morgan opened the file. There it was, clear as day. Dalton's deliberate elbow, Morgan's unmoving response, the smirk on his face, the gavel slamming down. Undeniable, unforgivable. "They'll come after you," Ethan said, staring at the screen. Morgan didn't blink. "Let them." Behind her, the burner phone buzzed. A single text popped up on the cracked screen. "Stop now, or next time it won't just be a warning." Morgan smiled grimly. "We just found the match," she said. "Now let's light the fire." The next morning, Atlanta woke to a storm it couldn't ignore. At precisely 7:03 a.m., a video exploded across every major social media platform. Not some shaky cell phone clip, not some anonymous accusation. Footage, time-stamped and verified, of Officer Rick Dalton assaulting a decorated Navy SEAL inside a courtroom. Under oath, under cameras, under the very flag he had sworn to protect. Within minutes, it wasn't just trending, it was detonating. News anchors scrambled to rewrite their morning scripts. Politicians tweeted carefully worded statements. And by 7:40 a.m., the mayor of Atlanta was demanding a full investigation. At the center of it all stood one name, one story: Morgan Carter. Morgan didn't watch the explosion from the comfort of her couch. She wasn't sipping coffee and smiling at her victory. She was moving. In a tiny backroom office of a rundown community center 2 blocks off Peachtree Street, Morgan stood shoulder to shoulder with Leah Banks, the independent journalist who had agreed to take the risk. Leah's fingers flew across her battered MacBook, uploading backup copies of the footage to encrypted clouds, cross-posting the evidence onto secure servers around the country. No way to erase it now. No way to pretend it hadn't happened. "You sure you're ready for this?" Leah asked without looking up. Morgan stared out the window, watching as an unmarked black SUV circled the block a little too slowly. "I was born ready," she said quietly. Leah smiled, but it was a grim thing. "This isn't just Dalton anymore," she warned. "When you hit one dirty cop, you rattle the tree. And when the tree shakes, a lot of ugly things fall out." Morgan turned back to her, her face stone-set. "Good. Let them fall." By noon, the Atlanta Police Department was in full damage control. Dalton had been placed on administrative leave. Pending investigation, they said. But it was too late for their carefully crafted statements. The footage had already reached Washington, D.C., and it wasn't just a bad cop story anymore. It was a systemic rot story, a who knew what and when story, a how deep does this go story. The Justice Department announced they were reviewing materials related to recent allegations. That was government speak for, "We smell blood." And the city wasn't waiting. People marched outside the courthouse where Morgan had stood just hours before. Handmade signs waved in the spring breeze. "Protect our soldiers, protect our families, protect our justice." But while the city burned metaphorically, Morgan's world almost burned literally. That night at 9:16 p.m., her door exploded inward. 3 men in plain clothes, no badges, no warnings, just violence, stormed into her tiny apartment. But Morgan Carter hadn't survived battlefields across 3 continents by being slow. The first man barely got 2 steps inside before Morgan sidestepped and slammed him into the wall, disarming his weapon with a twist that snapped his wrist. The second lunged, a wild haymaker. But Morgan dropped low, sweeping his legs out from under him and driving her elbow into his ribs as he crashed down. The third hesitated. Bad mistake. Morgan was on him before he could blink, shoving him hard into the open door frame, his own gun skittering across the floor. 3 men, 20 seconds. Morgan stood over them, chest rising and falling. Not from fear, but from the sheer restraint it took not to break something more permanent. "Tell your bosses," she growled, kneeling beside the man moaning on the floor. "I buried better men than you halfway across the world. You think I'm scared of cowards with guns?" Sirens wailed faintly in the distance. Neighbors had already called the cops, but Morgan knew better than to wait for help. She kicked their guns out of reach, grabbed her pre-packed go bag from under the couch, and turned to Ethan, who was white-faced and shaking by the kitchen counter. "Move," she said simply. They slipped into the night, down the fire escape, across back alleys, blending into the pulse of a city too loud and too tired to notice two more ghosts. By the time the sun rose again, the story had evolved. Now it wasn't just Dalton. It wasn't just about one courtroom. It was about decades of silence, decades of fear, decades of families like Ethan's, caught in a system rigged against them. Morgan's name was on every headline now. Decorated Navy SEAL exposes corruption in Atlanta PD. Federal investigation launched after explosive allegations. The woman who wouldn't stay silent. Standing in a borrowed safe house, Morgan watched the news flash across a cracked television screen. Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, his body still tense, but his eyes different, hopeful. Maybe for the first time in months. "You started something," he said quietly. Morgan didn't turn away from the screen. "No," she said, voice low. "We started something, and now we finish it." She smiled, a small, sharp thing, as the world outside caught fire. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with truth. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like the right people were finally listening. The Fulton County Courthouse had never seen anything like it. By the time Morgan Carter and Ethan Carter returned, escorted discreetly by federal agents, the streets outside were packed with protesters, journalists, and ordinary citizens, waving signs and chanting slogans. Inside, the courtroom was standing room only, wall to wall with people who had watched the videos, read the reports, and refused to look away. No cameras were allowed this time, but it didn't matter. Everyone knew this wasn't just another hearing. It was a reckoning. Judge Holloway entered, her robe flowing behind her like a dark wave. The room stood. The gavel cracked sharply. "This court is now in session." Morgan sat next to Ethan at the defense table, her hands steady, her gaze forward. Ethan wore a suit 2 sizes too big, borrowed from one of Noah Reeves' old contacts. He looked like a kid dressing up for Halloween, but when he glanced at Morgan, he squared his shoulders. He remembered he wasn't alone. The prosecutor, a new one this time, rose. No smug smile, no grandstanding. He adjusted his tie nervously. "Your Honor," he began, his voice strained but steady. "In light of newly discovered evidence and a federal investigation currently underway, the state of Georgia moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Ethan Carter with prejudice." A gasp rippled through the courtroom. With prejudice, meaning they could never charge him again for this. Meaning this nightmare was officially, legally, over. Judge Holloway didn't even blink. "Motion granted," she said briskly. "Mr. Carter, you are free to go." The gavel slammed again, not with the mechanical tap of bureaucracy, but with the weight of justice finally being heard. The gallery erupted, applause, cheers, a few sobs from strangers who had never met Ethan, but somehow knew his fight. Morgan remained still for a beat longer, locking eyes with the judge, giving a small, almost imperceptible nod. Respect given where it was earned, not demanded. Outside, the sunlight hit harder, brighter, sharper. Like the world had shifted on its axis and everything had snapped into focus. Reporters swarmed them instantly, microphones shoved into faces, questions flung like knives. "Morgan, do you feel vindicated? Will you sue the department? What do you say to Officer Dalton's defenders? What's next?" Morgan paused at the top of the courthouse steps, her brother standing slightly behind her, and faced the crowd. No teleprompter, no PR team, just truth. "You saw the footage," she said, her voice cutting cleanly through the chaos. "You read the reports. You know what happened inside that courtroom. This isn't about one bad cop. This is about a system that protects them. And it ends now." The crowd roared. Morgan didn't stay for more questions. She didn't need to. The truth was already loose, and it wasn't going back in the cage. That night, the city shook again. Federal marshals raided precinct headquarters across Atlanta. Computers were seized, Hard drives copied, internal affairs officers escorted out in handcuffs. By midnight, half a dozen high-ranking officers had resigned for personal reasons. By dawn, the governor was on national television promising sweeping reforms. And Rick Dalton? He didn't go quietly. An arrest warrant was issued for assault, obstruction of justice, witness intimidation, and conspiracy to cover up misconduct. He was picked up at a motel 2 counties over, trying to flee the state, handcuffed, head bowed, no smug grin now. Morgan and Ethan watched it unfold from the safety of a borrowed Airbnb under an alias. Neither spoke for a long time. Ethan finally broke the silence. "So what now?" he asked, his voice raw but steady. Morgan leaned back against the battered couch, stretching out muscles still wired too tight. "Now," she echoed. "Now we rebuild." Ethan looked skeptical. "Rebuild what? They're just gonna replace Dalton with another Dalton." Morgan's mouth quirked into a half-smile. "Maybe, but now people are watching. Now they know what to look for. Now they know it's possible to fight back and win." Ethan stared at her for a long moment, the weight of everything they had survived settling into his bones. "You really think one person can change it all?" Morgan smiled wider. A real smile this time. Not triumphant, not cocky, just true. "No," she said simply, "but one person can light the match." She held up her burner phone, the same one that had launched the first video. On the cracked screen, a new message had arrived from Leah Banks. "The footage is being archived in national records. Congratulations, you made history." Morgan set the phone down carefully, not as a trophy, as a reminder. "This isn't about winning once," she said almost to herself. "It's about never letting them forget we're still here, still fighting." In the days that followed, Morgan Carter's name became both a shield and a sword. Some called her a hero. Others called her a traitor. She didn't care about either. What mattered was the dozen emails she received every morning, from people across the country, across the world. Mothers thanking her for standing up. Veterans saying she gave them hope. Students asking how they could fight injustice where they lived. Morgan answered every single one, not with speeches, not with politics, but with a simple promise. Keep standing, keep fighting, keep lighting fires. Because sometimes it only takes a spark to burn down a forest of corruption. And Morgan Carter, she had become the match they never saw coming. 1 year later, the city looked different. Not perfect, not fixed, but different. Billboards that once displayed perfume ads or lawyer hotlines now bore stark, black and white banners. Justice is not a favor, it's a right. Stand up, speak out, stay free. And somewhere beneath the asphalt and noise, something had shifted. A pressure, a pulse. A new kind of storm brewing, not of violence, but of vigilance. Morgan Carter leaned against the balcony railing of a small community center on the east side of Atlanta. Below her, a crowd gathered. A sea of faces, young and old, black and white, uniforms and hoodies, suits and sneakers. They weren't here for a protest. They were here for a beginning. The kickoff rally for the Sentinel Project, a grassroots movement born out of one courtroom shove, one video gone viral, and one woman who refused to be silent. Morgan adjusted the microphone clipped to her jacket. She wasn't used to speeches. She didn't want to be a symbol. But some battles chose you. The crowd quieted as she stepped onto the makeshift stage. A few pallets nailed together, draped in an American flag older than half the kids in the front row. Morgan's voice cut across the warm Georgia air, steady and unflinching. 1 year ago, I walked into a courtroom thinking the truth would be enough. A murmur swept the crowd. Recognition, anger, memory. It wasn't. She let the words hang there. Truth didn't save my brother. Truth didn't stop a corrupt officer. Truth didn't tear down a system built to protect itself. The silence deepened, not heavy, electric. What saved him was you. She swept a hand across the faces watching her. You who shared the footage. You who marched. You who refused to let the news cycle bury another injustice. Applause broke out. Raw, thunderous. Morgan waited for it to die down before continuing. The Sentinel Project isn't about me. It's not about one case or one city. She stepped closer to the edge of the stage, lowering her voice until it was almost a growl. It's about the idea that the system watches us because it thinks we're weak. But now we're watching back. Cheers erupted. A few people stood, fists raised. Over the past year, Morgan hadn't stopped moving. She worked with veterans groups, civil rights attorneys, tech activists. She helped set up encrypted tip lines for whistleblowers inside police departments, organized legal defense funds for families who couldn't afford to fight, built networks where none had existed, and the Sentinel Project grew. What started as a single rally had turned into a website, a helpline, a national database of abuse cases. Accessible, searchable, public. Not everyone loved it. Some politicians called it dangerous. Some newspapers called it reckless vigilantism. Morgan called it necessary, because if the institutions wouldn't fix themselves, then the people would. One file, one story, one voice at a time. After the rally, Morgan stepped off the stage, her boots crunching gravel. Ethan waited for her near a folding table stacked with t-shirts and flyers. He looked different now, too. Stronger. A year of healing hadn't erased everything, but it had given him something new. Ownership of his own story. "You crushed it," he said, grinning. Morgan rolled her eyes playfully. "Don't make me throw up." They laughed, real, unguarded. It felt good, human, alive. Later that night, back at her small apartment, Morgan sat cross-legged on the worn leather couch, her laptop balanced on her knees. Emails poured in faster than she could read them. A sheriff's deputy in Kentucky, ready to expose a rigged evidence locker. A teacher in Missouri, fired after reporting discrimination. A nurse in Texas, silenced after speaking out about abusive patients. Each email carried the same thread: fear, hope, a spark. Morgan answered them carefully, methodically, treating each one like the live wire it was, because she knew better than anyone. One match could burn down a forest, but it could also light the way. At midnight, she finally closed her laptop and stepped onto the balcony. Atlanta stretched out before her, glittering, stubborn, alive. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the warm, humid air. The fight wasn't over. It never would be. But for the first time, Morgan Carter didn't feel alone in it. She had an army now, an invisible one, an unstoppable one. Because the truth wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a wildfire. And Morgan Carter, she had become the spark that refused to die. Change doesn't happen because we wait for heroes. It happens because ordinary people refuse to back down. Morgan Carter didn't set out to start a revolution. She just refused to stay silent. And that refusal, that unbreakable stand, lit a fire that's still burning today. One voice can become 1,000. One truth can break through 1,000 lies. This isn't the end. It's just the beginning. Be the spark. Light the way.